Ilara didn't know that the man breaking down her tower door was the Alpha King. She didn't know that he had been searching for her across 3 kingdoms, following the golden thread of their bond that pulled at something deep in his chest. And she certainly didn't know that her imprisonment in this crumbling tower had driven him to the edge of madness for 3 days and nights. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the stone chamber like thunder. Ilara pressed herself against the far wall, her legs too weak from hunger to hold her properly. 3 days since her family had locked her in this forgotten tower room with nothing but stale water and their cruel promise that she would stay until she agreed to marry Lord Cassius. 3 days of listening to her stomach gnaw at itself while she stared at the single barred window, watching ravens circle like harbingers of her death. The door exploded inward with a violence that shook dust from the ancient stones. Wood flew in jagged pieces, hinges screaming as they tore free from the frame. Through the destruction stepped a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the torchlight from the corridor beyond. Rage. That was the first thing she noticed about him. It radiated from every line of his body, from the way his hands clenched into fists to the way his chest rose and fell with barely controlled fury. His dark hair was wild, as if he had been running his fingers through it for hours, and his clothes bore the dust of hard travel. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath in her throat, storm grey, like the sky before lightning strikes, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, seen despite the shadows that cloaked half her face. "Gods above," he breathed, and his voice was rough, broken. "What have they done to you?" Ilara tried to speak, tried to form words around the desert that was her throat. Instead, a sound escaped her that was half sob, half sigh. He was across the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside her with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so large. "Easy," he murmured, his voice gentling instantly. "I'm here. You're safe now." When his hands touched her face, checking for injuries with fingers that trembled despite their strength, something electric shot through her. Heat, warmth, a golden feeling that started where his skin met hers and spread through her chest like honey in her veins. Impossible. She had heard stories, whispered tales of the bond that connected true mates, but those were fairy tales, weren't they? Stories told to young girls to make them believe in love. She was nothing, nobody. The unwanted daughter of a minor lord who had locked her away rather than deal with her stubborn refusal to marry for political gain. "Water," he said, not to her, but to someone behind him. "And food, now." Only then did Ilara notice the other men in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered warriors who wore their strength like armour. But they deferred to this stranger, bowing their heads before disappearing to fulfill his commands. "Who?" she tried to whisper. "Shh." His thumb brushed over her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realised had fallen. "Rest now. Let me take care of you." The water came first, cool and blessed against her cracked lips. He helped her drink slowly, patiently, his hand steady at the back of her neck. Then came bread, soft and warm, and soup that tasted like heaven after 3 days of nothing. "Better?" he asked when she had eaten what little her shrunken stomach could hold. She nodded, suddenly aware that she was leaning against him, had been leaning against him while he fed her like she was something precious, something worth saving. "What's your name?" His voice was careful, gentle, as if he was afraid she might break. "Ilara," she whispered. "Ilara of House Blackthorn." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, satisfaction, she couldn't be sure. "And who did this to you, Ilara of House Blackthorn?" The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest, like it meant something to him, like she meant something to him. "My father," she admitted, shame burning in her cheeks. "My family, I refused to marry Lord Cassius. He's cruel, and I—" She stopped, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger who had somehow found her in a place where no one should have been able to find her. "You said no." There was approval in his voice, warm and sure. "You were brave." Before she could respond, before she could ask who he was or how he had known to find her, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy boots against stone and voices calling out, "Your Majesty? Your Majesty, is she?" The words died as 3 more warriors appeared in the destroyed doorway. But these men didn't just defer to her rescuer. They dropped to one knee, heads bowed in obvious reverence. "Your Majesty," one of them said, "the horses are ready. We can have Lady Alara back to the palace within the hour." The world tilted. Majesty. Palace. Alara stared at the man who still held her, whose warmth still surrounded her like a shield against everything that had hurt her. The man who had broken down her door with his bare hands and fed her soup like she was something precious. "You're—" she breathed. His storm-grey eyes met hers, steady and patient and kind. "I'm Kieran," he said simply, "and I've been looking for you for a very long time." The Alpha King, the most powerful man in the realm, the wolf shifter whose very name made grown warriors tremble and whose word was law across 3 kingdoms. He had come for her. He had searched for her. He had saved her. But why? The question burned in her throat, too large and terrifying to voice, because what could the Alpha King possibly want with someone like her? What could she offer him except the shame of her family's rejection and the stubborn will that had landed her in this tower in the first place? As if he could read the fear in her eyes, Kieran's hand found hers, his fingers weaving through hers with a rightness that made her breath catch. "Trust me," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her want to believe. Something that made the golden warmth in her chest pulse stronger. "I'll explain everything. But first, let's get you somewhere safe." Safe. When was the last time she had felt safe? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and let him lift her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. His strength surrounded her, steady and sure, and for the first time in 3 days, the fear that had been her constant companion began to ease. But as they left the tower behind, as she felt the cool night air against her face and saw the massive destriers waiting below, one question echoed in her mind. Why would the Alpha King of the Northern Territories risk everything to save a nobody like her? The journey to Kieran's stronghold passed in a haze of warmth and wonder. Alara had never ridden on such a magnificent horse, had never been cradled against a chest so broad and steady. Every step of his destrier sent vibrations through her body, but Kieran's arms around her were unwavering, a shield against the cool night air and her own spinning thoughts. "Sleep," he murmured against her hair when she tried to stay alert, tried to make sense of what had happened. "You're safe now." And impossibly she did. For the first time in months, maybe years, Alara slept without fear. She woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows and the softest bed she had ever touched. Silk sheets, she realized with wonder, running her fingers over the smooth fabric. Real silk, the kind she had only seen in her mother's jewellery box, save for special occasions that never came. "Good, you're awake." Kieran's voice drew her attention to the chair beside her bed. He had changed clothes, she noticed. Gone were the travel-stained leathers, replaced by a simple white shirt that made his dark hair and storm-grey eyes seem even more striking. But he looked tired, as if he hadn't slept at all. "How long?" she began. 2 days, he said, and there was something like relief in his voice. "You've been sleeping for 2 days. The healers said your body needed time to recover." 2 days. She had lost 2 entire days, and he had been here watching over her. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sent a warm flutter through her chest. "You didn't have to stay," she said, though even as the words left her lips, she knew she didn't mean them. "Yes, I did." His response was immediate, certain. "I couldn't leave you, not after—" He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. "Not after I felt what you went through." "What I went through?" Kieran leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees. "The bond," he said simply. "You felt it too, didn't you, when I touched you in the tower?" The golden warmth, the electric feeling that had shot through her like lightning. She nodded, unable to deny what she had experienced. "I felt your fear," he continued, his voice rough, "your hunger, your despair. For 3 days it was like being slowly torn apart from the inside." "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. The stories her grandmother had told her, the old tales of true mates who could feel each other's emotions, share each other's pain. Is it?" He stood, moving to the window that overlooked what she could now see was a vast courtyard bustling with people. "Tell me, Elara, have you ever felt incomplete, like something vital was missing from your life?" Yes. God, yes. She had felt that way for as long as she could remember, the restless ache, the sense that she was searching for something she couldn't name. "I have," he said when she didn't answer. "My entire life I've felt like half of myself was missing. Until 3 days ago, when I felt your distress so clearly it nearly brought me to my knees." He turned from the window, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I searched every kingdom, followed every rumour and whisper. I knew you were out there somewhere. I knew you needed me." "But why me?" The question burst from her lips before she could stop it. "I'm nobody, the unwanted daughter of a minor lord who couldn't even manage to marry me off properly." The change in Kieran's expression was swift and fierce. In 2 strides he was beside her bed again, his hand reaching out as if to touch her face before he caught himself. "You are not nobody," he said, and there was an edge to his voice that made her shiver. "Don't let their cruelty make you believe that." "They locked me in a tower to starve," she said, the words coming out bitter and broken. "My own family, because I refused to marry a man who looked at me like I was a piece of meat to be consumed." "Tell me about him." Kieran's voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "This Lord Cassius." Elara pulled the silk sheet higher, suddenly feeling exposed despite being fully clothed in the soft nightgown someone had dressed her in. "He's cruel," she said finally. "He came to our house with stories of the women who had served in his household, the ones who had disappointed him. They all seemed to disappear after that." She shuddered. "My father didn't care. Cassius offered a good bride price, and that was all that mattered. And you said no." "I said no." She lifted her chin, finding strength in the memory of her defiance. "I told my father I would rather die than marry that monster." "So they tried to starve you into submission?" "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly soft. "They will answer for what they did to you." "You can't," she said quickly, panic flaring in her chest. "My lord, you can't risk a conflict with my family over someone like me." "Someone like you?" He did touch her then, his fingers gentle under her chin, lifting her face to meet his gaze. "Elara, you are my mate, my true mate. There is nothing in this world more precious to me than someone like you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Mate! She had suspected, had felt the pull between them, but to hear him say it so plainly, so certainly. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Is it?" His thumb brushed over her cheek, and she realized she was crying again. "Does this feel impossible to you?" It didn't. That was the terrifying truth. Being here with him, in this beautiful room with sunlight streaming through the windows and his gentle hands on her face, felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You're the Alpha King. You could have anyone. Why would the gods bind you to someone so—" "So brave," he interrupted, "so strong, so willing to face starvation rather than submit to cruelty." "So broken," she finished. "You're not broken." His voice was fierce now, protective. "You're perfect, and I've been waiting my entire life for you." Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Voices raised in anger, the sound of horses, heavy footsteps on stone. Kieran's expression darkened as he moved to the window. "What is it?" Elara asked, though part of her already knew. "Your family," he said grimly. "They've come to demand your return." Fear crashed over her like a cold wave. "They can't. They won't dare." "They dare." Kieran turned from the window, and there was something dangerous in his eyes now. Something that reminded her that beneath his gentleness lay the power of an Alpha King. "They're demanding I return their property immediately." "I have to go with them," she said, panic making her voice thin. "If I don't, they'll—" "They'll what?" Kieran's voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. "Start a war with me? Over you?" "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "They'll see it as a matter of honour, and you can't risk your people for someone like me." "Elara." He was beside her again, his hands framing her face. "Listen to me carefully. You are not going back to them, not ever. And if they want to try to take you from me, they're welcome to try." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." His voice gentled, but his eyes remained fierce. "I understand that you've been taught to believe you're worthless. I understand that you've been hurt and betrayed by the people who should have protected you. But I also understand this." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You are mine now," he said, his voice low and sure, "and I protect what's mine." Before she could argue, before she could voice all the fears and doubts crowding her throat, he pressed his lips to hers. Soft, gentle, but underneath the tenderness was something that made her toes curl and her heart race. When he pulled away, she was breathless. "Trust me," he said, echoing his words from the tower. "Let me handle this." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good." He stood, and she could see him transforming before her eyes. Gone was the gentle man who had fed her soup and watched over her sleep. In his place stood the Alpha King, powerful and dangerous and absolutely certain of his authority. "Stay here," he commanded. "No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, stay in this room until I come for you." "Kieran, promise me." His grey eyes were intense, demanding. "I promise." He smiled then, quick and fierce and full of promise. "Good, because after I deal with your family, we have a claiming ceremony to plan." Elara pressed her ear to the heavy door, her heart hammering against her ribs as voices echoed from the courtyard below. Even through stone walls she could hear her father's voice, sharp and demanding. Lord Cassius, too, his tone carrying that oily quality that had made her skin crawl from the first moment she met him. "Your Majesty," her father was saying, "we appreciate your intervention, but the girl belongs to us. Her marriage contract was signed months ago." Kieran's response was too low for her to catch, but something in the way the other voices suddenly quieted made the hair on her arm stand up. She shouldn't be listening. She should be in bed, following his orders like a good, grateful, rescued maiden. But Elara had never been particularly good at being what she should be. The door opened so suddenly she stumbled backward, nearly falling before strong hands caught her. "I thought I might find you here," Kieran said, and there was amusement in his voice despite the tension she could feel radiating from his body. "I was just eavesdropping." His mouth quirked up at one corner. "Come on. If you're going to listen to them insult you, you might as well do it properly." Before she could protest, he was guiding her through corridors she hadn't seen before, past tapestries that depicted great battles and portraits of stern-faced kings. Servants bowed as they passed, but their eyes were curious, measuring. "Kieran, I don't think—" "They're here because of you," he said simply. "You deserve to hear what they have to say." He led her to a balcony that overlooked the great hall, hidden from view by carved stone pillars, but providing a perfect vantage point. Below, her father and Lord Cassius stood before Kieran's throne, flanked by a handful of guards who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "She's always been willful," her father was saying, his voice carrying clearly now. Stubborn, ungrateful. We've done our best with her, but... Kieran's voice cut through her father's rambling like a blade. She's unnatural, Your Majesty. Strange things happen around her. Sick animals that suddenly recover when she touches them. Wounds that heal too quickly. The servants whisper that she's cursed. Ilara's breath caught. They knew. They had always known. And you thought the solution was to starve her? Kieran's voice was deceptively calm. We thought marriage might settle her. Lord Cassius is willing to overlook her peculiarities in exchange for the alliance our families would provide. How generous of him. There was ice in Kieran's tone now. And what does Lord Cassius think of his bride's peculiarities? Cassius stepped forward, and Ilara shrank back instinctively, even though he couldn't see her. I believe I can manage her, Your Majesty. With the proper guidance, she'll learn to control her unnatural impulses, and if not... He shrugged. There are ways to deal with such things. My late wife also had troublesome tendencies. Your late wife, Kieran repeated, and something in his voice made Ilara's blood go cold. How did she die, Lord Cassius? A fall, Cassius said quickly. Tragic accident. She was always clumsy. I see. Kieran stood from his throne, and even from her hidden position, Ilara could see the way both men took an involuntary step backward. And you think I should hand over my mate to a man whose wives have a tendency toward tragic accidents? Your mate? Her father's voice rose to nearly a shout. Your Majesty, surely you jest. She's nothing, nobody. A minor lord's daughter with questionable bloodlines and unnatural abilities. You could have any woman in the kingdom. You're right, Kieran said calmly. I could, but I want her. She's already promised to another, Cassius snarled, his polite facade finally cracking. The contracts are signed, the bride price paid. Then you'll be refunding that price. Kieran's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Because she's not going anywhere with you. You cannot simply steal another man's betrothed, her father protested. Even you must respect the law. The law? Kieran laughed, but there was no humour in it. Very well. Let's discuss the law. The law that says any father who locks his daughter in a tower to starve forfeits all parental rights. The law that says any man who threatens a woman under my protection answers to me personally. She's not under your protection, Cassius snapped. She's ours by right. Is she? The question seemed to hang in the air for a moment before Kieran turned toward the balcony where Ilara hid. Ilara! He called, and his voice was gentler now, though still carrying the authority that made strong men kneel. Come down here, love. Love. The endearment sent warmth spiralling through her chest, even as terror froze her feet to the floor. I can't, she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. But apparently he could see her because he smiled. It's all right, he said. Show them what you really are. Somehow her feet carried her down the stairs and into the great hall. Her father's face went white when he saw her, while Cassius's expression darkened with something that might have been hunger. There's our wayward bride, Cassius said, reaching for her. He never made contact. Kieran moved faster than humanly possible, placing himself between Ilara and the other man with a speed that spoke of his wolf nature. Touch her, he said softly, and lose the hand. You go too far, her father blustered. She belongs to us. Does she? Kieran turned to look at Ilara, and she saw something in his eyes that gave her courage. Ilara, do you belong to them? She looked at her father, at the man who had locked her away and left her to starve, at Cassius, whose eyes held the same cold cruelty she had seen in his stories about his previous wives. No. And do you wish to marry Lord Cassius? No. The word came out stronger this time. You see? Kieran spread his hands. She chooses for herself. She's not of age to choose, her father snapped. And even if she were, she's damaged goods now, ruined by her time in your palace. Damaged? The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Ruined?" "3 days alone with the Alpha King," Cassius sneered. "No man will want her now." "You're absolutely right," Kieran said pleasantly. "No man will want her, because she's mine." Ilara felt something shift inside her chest. A warmth, a power she had always tried to suppress because it frightened her family, frightened everyone who saw it. "You want to see what I really am," she said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. Both men turned to stare at her, and she saw the exact moment they realized she wasn't the same broken girl they had locked away. "You want to see why you called me unnatural? Cursed?" She walked to where one of Kieran's guards stood, a young man with a fresh bandage wrapped around his sword arm. Without asking permission, she placed her hand over the injury. Light, golden, warm light that seemed to flow from her fingers into his arm. The guard's eyes widened as the pain that had been etched across his features simply disappeared. When Ilara pulled her hand away, the bandage fell to reveal unmarked skin. "Impossible," her father breathed. "Not impossible," Kieran said, and there was pride in his voice. Rare, precious, the gift of a true healer. "Witchcraft," Cassius hissed. "Dark magic." "Is it dark?" Kieran asked mildly. He gestured to the guard, who was flexing his arm with wonder. "Marcus, does that feel dark to you?" "No, Your Majesty," the guard said, his voice filled with awe. "It feels pure, clean, like sunlight." "You see?" Kieran turned back to Ilara's father and Cassius. "Not cursed, blessed, and you wanted to beat it out of her or use it for your own gain." "She could have healed for us," her father said desperately, "brought honour to our house." "By marrying a man who killed his last wife?" Ilara's voice was steady now, sure. "By hiding what I am and pretending to be normal while you profited from my abilities." "It's what daughters do," her father snapped. "Serve their families." "Not any more." Kieran stepped to Ilara's side, his hand finding hers. "She serves her kingdom now, as my Luna, as my queen." "Your queen?" Cassius's face twisted with rage. "You would make that creature your queen?" The change in Kieran was instantaneous. One moment he was a man, the next he was something far more dangerous. His eyes flashed gold, and the scent of wild storms filled the air. "What did you call her?" I... Cassius stumbled backward, suddenly remembering exactly who he was insulting. "I think," Kieran said conversationally, though power radiated from every line of his body, "that you've overstayed your welcome. The contracts," her father tried weakly, "are void." Kieran's voice brooked no argument. "She chooses me, and I choose her. Any man who has a problem with that is welcome to challenge me for her." The silence that followed was deafening. "I thought not," Kieran continued. "Guards, escort these gentlemen to the border. Make sure they understand that they are no longer welcome in my territory." "You can't," her father said desperately. "She's our daughter." "Was," Ilara corrected, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I was your daughter until you locked me in a tower and left me to die." "Ilara, no." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in years. "You made your choice. Now I make mine." She turned to Kieran, this man who had saved her, protected her, seen her at her weakest and her strongest, and called her precious both times. "I choose you," she said simply. The smile that spread across his face was brighter than her healing light. "And I choose you," he replied, "for now and always." When he kissed her this time, it was different from the gentle press of lips in her chamber. This was a claiming, a promise, a declaration before gods and men that she belonged to him and he to her. When they broke apart, her father and Cassius were already being escorted away by grim-faced guards. "No regrets?" Kieran asked softly, his forehead resting against hers. Ilara looked around the great hall at the servants and guards who were looking at her not with fear, but with respect, at the man who held her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. No regrets, she whispered, and for the first time in her life she truly meant it. Word came at dawn 3 days later, delivered by a rider whose horse was foaming at the mouth from hard travel. Ilara was in the garden when she heard the commotion, practicing with her healing abilities on the roses that had been damaged by an early frost. Under her touch, the brown-edged petals unfurled into perfect crimson blooms, and she was beginning to understand that this gift wasn't something to be hidden or feared. It was part of her, as natural as breathing. "My lady," one of the younger guards called to her, his face pale with worry. "The king requests your presence in the great hall, immediately." The tone in his voice made her stomach drop. She had been learning to read the moods of Kieran's household, and this wasn't the respectful summons she had grown accustomed to. This was urgent, dangerous. She found Kieran in full royal regalia, the crown of the Northern Territories gleaming silver against his dark hair. Around him stood his war council, their faces grim, and scattered across the great table were documents that bore official seals. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Kieran's jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. "Your father has formally accused me of kidnapping and corrupting a nobleman's daughter. He's demanded trial by combat to reclaim you." "He can't," she breathed. "He has no right. He's claiming I used supernatural coercion to steal you from your rightful betrothed." Kieran's voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the fury burning in his storm-grey eyes. "Lord Cassius has supported the claim, stating that no woman would willingly choose exile from her family without unnatural influence." "They're calling you a witch," one of his advisers said bluntly, "and him a kidnapper who used dark magic to steal an innocent maiden." Ilara felt the familiar shame creep up her throat, the old voices that whispered she was nothing, nobody, not worth this kind of trouble. "They're right," she said quietly. "You should let me go back. End this before it becomes a war." "What?" Kieran's attention snapped to her with a laser focus. "I'm not worth a conflict between kingdoms," she continued, wrapping her arms around herself. "I never should have let this go so far." The silence that followed was deafening. When Kieran spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. "Everyone out." "Your Majesty," one adviser began. "Out." The word carried the unmistakable authority of an alpha command. "Now." The room cleared in seconds, leaving them alone among the scattered documents and the weight of impending conflict. "Look at me," Kieran said, but Ilara kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "Ilara, look at me." When she finally raised her gaze, she was startled by the intensity she found there. "Do you truly believe you're not worth fighting for?" "I'm one person," she whispered. "How many will die if this comes to war? How many families will be destroyed because you wanted to protect someone who—" "Who what?" He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Someone who saved my guard's life with a touch. Someone who chose courage over comfort every single day of her life. Someone who is destined to be the most powerful Luna this realm has ever known." "You don't understand," she said desperately. "My father has allies. Lord Cassius has wealth and connections. They can make this into something bigger than just me." "Good." The word was sharp, final. "Let them try." Before she could protest, horns sounded from the courtyard. The formal announcement of visitors, but there were too many of them, and they were coming too fast. Kieran moved to the window, and his expression darkened further. "It seems we won't have to wait for a formal challenge," he said grimly. "They're here." Ilara joined him at the window, and her heart nearly stopped. The courtyard was filled with armed men, bearing the banners of House Blackthorn and House Cassius. But there were others too, minor lords and their retainers, enough for a small army. They brought witnesses, she realised. They're going to force a public confrontation. "Then let's give them one." Kieran's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Guards!" he called. Within moments his men flooded back into the hall, along with what seemed like half the palace staff and every noble currently in residence. "Assemble the court," Kieran commanded. "Full ceremonial dress. If they want a public challenge, they'll have one." An hour later, the great hall was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls 3 deep. Elara had been given a place of honour beside Kieran's throne, wearing a gown of deep blue silk that marked her as under royal protection. The massive doors opened with a thunderous crash, and her father strode in flanked by Lord Cassius and a dozen other nobles. Behind them came their armed escort, and Elara noticed with growing dread that many of the faces were familiar. Lords who had attended her father's table, who had smiled at her as a child. They had all turned against her. "Your Majesty," her father called out, his voice carrying clearly through the packed hall, "I come to reclaim my daughter, who was taken from her lawful guardians through supernatural coercion and dark magic." "And I," Lord Cassius added, stepping forward with a confidence that made Elara's skin crawl, "come to claim my betrothed, who was stolen on the very eve of our wedding." "Interesting claims," Kieran said mildly, though Elara could feel the tension radiating from him. "Do you have proof of this coercion?" "What proof do we need beyond her presence here?" her father demanded. "No woman of good breeding would willingly abandon her family for a life of sin and corruption." "Sin and corruption?" Kieran's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper Elara was learning to recognize. "Please, enlighten us. What sins has my intended queen committed?" "She practices witchcraft," Cassius declared loudly enough for the entire hall to hear. "Dark magic that corrupts the natural order. I have witnesses who will swear to her unnatural abilities." "Do you?" Kieran stood from his throne, and Elara felt the shift in the room's energy. "Witnesses to witchcraft?" "She healed injuries that should have taken weeks to mend," her father said. "Made sick animals well with a touch. These are not natural gifts, but the workings of darkness." "I see." Kieran descended the steps of his throne platform, moving with predatory grace. "And your solution was to lock her in a tower to starve?" "We sought to break the hold of whatever demon possessed her," Cassius answered, "to free her soul through purification, through starvation, through whatever means necessary." The hall was deadly silent now, everyone waiting for Kieran's response. When it came, his voice was clear and carrying. "Guards, bring the child!" Elara's breath caught as she recognized the small boy being gently led into the hall. Marcus's son, the guard whose arm she had healed. The child had been dying of fever just yesterday, his small body racked with the same illness that had claimed his mother. "This boy was dying," Kieran announced. "The healers had given up hope. His father was preparing for a funeral." He gestured to Elara, and she understood. With her heart hammering, she rose from her chair and walked to the child. His fever was breaking, but she could see the lingering weakness in his pale face. Without hesitation, she knelt and placed her hands on his small chest. Light, golden, warm light that filled the hall like captured sunlight. The child's colour returned, his breathing eased, and when she pulled her hands away, he was completely whole. The silence that followed was profound. "Witchcraft!" someone whispered from the crowd. "Dark magic," another voice agreed. But then Marcus stepped forward, dropping to one knee before Elara. "My lady," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you saved my son's life. If that's witchcraft, then I thank the gods for it." "And I thank them for you," came another voice. One of the kitchen maids, pushing through the crowd. "You healed my broken wrist when the healers said it would never work properly again." "And my horse," called out a stable boy. "She was dying, and you made her well." More voices joined in, a chorus of gratitude from servants and nobles alike. People Elara had helped in the days since her arrival, small kindnesses she had barely thought about. "You see," Kieran's voice cut through the growing noise, "dark magic indeed, the terrible darkness of healing, the horrible corruption of saving lives. It's unnatural, her father insisted, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Is it? Kieran smiled, and there was something terrifying in the expression. Tell me, Lord Blackthorn, what does the Church say about those blessed with the gift of healing? What do the Scriptures teach about those who ease suffering and save lives? Her father's face went pale as he realised the trap he had walked into. She's a saint, someone called out from the crowd, blessed by the gods themselves. A miracle worker, agreed another voice. Our future queen, came a third, and then others took up the chant. Our queen! Our blessed queen! Lord Cassius stepped forward desperately. The contracts are still valid, he shouted over the growing noise. She was promised to me, bought and paid for. Bought? Kieran's voice cut through the chanting like a blade. You speak of buying a woman blessed by the gods themselves? I speak of lawful marriage contracts, Cassius snarled. She belongs to me. Does she? Kieran turned to Ilara, and she saw the question in his eyes. Not just about the contracts, but about everything. Her choice, her future, her willingness to stand with him against the world. Ilara looked out at the packed hall, at the faces of people she was learning to love, people who had welcomed her and cherished her gifts instead of fearing them. Then she looked at her father and Lord Cassius, at the men who had locked her away and tried to break her spirit. I belong to no one, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. But I choose to stand with the man who saw my worth when others saw only shame. And I, Kieran said, taking her hand in his, choose to stand with the woman who will heal not just bodies, but our entire realm. He raised their joined hands, and his voice rang out with absolute authority. Behold your future Luna, he declared, blessed by the gods, chosen by me, and beloved by all who know her true heart. The cheer that rose from the crowd was deafening, but Cassius wasn't finished. I challenge that claim, he roared, his face twisted with rage. I demand trial by combat for the right to my betrothed. The hall fell silent again, but this silence was different, expectant, hungry. Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. Challenge accepted, he said, but understand this, Lord Cassius, you're not fighting for her hand, you're fighting for your life. The look that crossed Cassius's face suggested he was finally beginning to understand exactly who he had challenged, and that he had made a terrible mistake. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and healing. Word of the coming trial by combat had spread beyond the palace walls, drawing visitors from across the realm who wanted to witness the Alpha King defend his chosen mate. But for Ilara, those days became something else entirely, a glimpse into the life she was choosing, the people she would serve, the love she was finally allowing herself to accept. Each morning she woke in Kieran's arms as sunlight streamed through the tall windows of their shared chambers. He had moved her there the night after the challenge was issued, claiming that if Lord Cassius wanted to fight for her, he could damn well fight a man who was already sharing her bed. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured against her hair as she stirred in the golden light. "Not queen yet," she whispered back, though the protest was half-hearted. She was learning to love the way he said it, the certainty in his voice that made her believe it might actually be true. "You've been my queen since the moment I saw you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The ceremony will just make it official." The ceremony, their mating bond, which would be sealed publicly after Kieran dealt with Cassius. The thought still made her stomach flutter with nerves and anticipation in equal measure. But first there was healing to be done. Every day brought new people to the palace, drawn by stories of the future Luna who could cure what others could not. Ilara found herself in the newly converted healing chambers from dawn until dusk, her hands glowing with golden light as she mended broken bones, eased chronic pain, and saved lives that had been counted as lost. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Kieran said on the third day, finding her swaying on her feet after healing a little girl's twisted spine. There are so many, she replied, exhaustion making her voice thin. So many people who have been suffering for years. How can I rest when I could be helping them? Because, he said gently, steadying her with his strong hands, you can't heal everyone if you collapse from exhaustion, and because I need you whole and strong for what's coming. The trial. Lord Cassius had spent the 3 days since issuing his challenge gathering supporters and making increasingly wild accusations about Kieran's fitness to rule and Ilara's corrupting influence. Some of the minor lords were listening, she knew, men who saw opportunity in chaos, who thought a weakened Alpha King might be easier to manipulate. "Are you worried?" she asked as he led her to the private dining chamber where their evening meal waited. "About Cassius?" Kieran's laugh was sharp and dangerous. "No, I'm worried about what comes after, about the precedent this sets, about every ambitious lord who might think he can challenge me for what's mine." "What's yours?" she repeated softly. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Do you object to that phrasing?" "No," she said, and realized she meant it. "I'm yours, just as you're mine." The smile that crossed his face was brilliant and fierce. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Ilara found herself thinking about the people she had healed, the grateful faces and tearful thanks. She thought about the kitchen maid whose wrist she had mended, the stable boy whose horse she had saved, little Marcus's son running through the gardens with renewed energy. "They love you," Kieran said quietly, as if he could read her thoughts. "They love what I can do for them," she corrected. "No!" His voice was certain in the darkness. "They love you, the woman who kneels beside a dying child without thought for her own safety, the woman who tends to servants with the same care she shows to nobles, the woman who gives of herself until she can barely stand." "The woman who was locked in a tower to starve," she whispered. "The woman who survived that tower and emerged stronger." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "The woman who chose love over safety, trust over fear." "I'm still afraid sometimes," she admitted. "Good," he said, surprising her. "Fear keeps you careful, but don't let it keep you from claiming what's yours." "And what's mine?" "Everything," he said simply. "A kingdom that will adore you, a people who will follow you, a mate who will love you until his last breath." The morning of the trial dawned clear and cold, winter's bite sharp in the air. Ilara woke to find Kieran already dressed in his ceremonial armour, the crown of the Northern Territories gleaming against his dark hair. "It's time," he said when he saw she was awake. The arena had been prepared in the great courtyard, a circle of packed earth surrounded by wooden stands that groaned under the weight of spectators. Every seat was filled, and more people crowded beyond the barriers, eager to witness the trial that would determine their future Luna's fate. Ilara took her place in the royal box, wearing a gown of deep crimson that marked her as the prize being fought for. The symbolism made her stomach churn, but she understood its necessity. This wasn't just about her and Kieran anymore. It was about the stability of the realm, about whether an Alpha King could claim his chosen mate without interference from ambitious lords. Lord Cassius entered the arena first, resplendent in polished armour that caught the morning light. He was a skilled fighter, Ilara knew, with a reputation for brutality that extended far beyond the battlefield. But when Kieran stepped into the circle, the difference between them was immediately apparent. Kieran moved like death itself, fluid and certain and absolutely lethal. His armour was simpler than Cassius's, well used and battle-tested. He carried his grandfather's sword, the blade that had carved out the Northern Territories from wilderness and war. "Lord Cassius," the herald called, his voice carrying across the packed arena, "you have challenged the Alpha King's claim to the woman known as Ilara of House Blackthorn. Do you swear before gods and men that your cause is just?" "I do," Cassius called back, his voice strong and confident. "She was promised to me by lawful contract. I claim what is mine by right." "Your Majesty?" the herald continued, turning to Kieran. You have accepted this challenge. Do you swear before gods and men that your claim is true?" "I do," Kieran replied, and his voice carried a power that made the ground beneath them seem to tremble. "She is my mate, chosen by the gods themselves. I will defend that truth with my life." "Then let the trial begin," the herald declared, stepping back to the edge of the circle. The first clash of swords rang out like thunder, steel meeting steel, with a force that sent sparks flying. Cassius was good, Ilara had to admit, fast and strong and utterly without mercy. But Kieran was something else entirely. He fought like the wolf he was, all-controlled violence and predatory grace. Every movement was economical, purposeful, designed not just to defend, but to wear down his opponent. And beneath it all was a fury that Ilara could feel even from her seat in the stands, a rage at every slight and insult that had been thrown at his mate. The battle stretched on, neither man giving ground, both bleeding from minor cuts and welts. The crowd was silent now, holding its collective breath as the two warriors circled each other like the apex predators they were. Then Cassius made his mistake. "When I win," he called out between clashes, his voice carrying across the arena, "I'll make sure she learns proper obedience, the way my last wife did." Kieran went very still. "What did you say?" he asked, and his voice was deadly quiet. "She needs to learn her place," Cassius continued, apparently not recognizing the change in his opponent. "A firm hand, strict discipline. I broke the last one of her unnatural habits. I can break this one too." The roar that erupted from Kieran was purely animal, the sound of an alpha protecting his mate. When he moved, it was with inhuman speed and strength that spoke to his wolf nature. His sword became a blur of silver death, driving Cassius back step by step until the other man stumbled and fell. Kieran's blade found his throat before he could rise. "Yield," Kieran commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha in full fury. Cassius's eyes were wide with sudden understanding. "I yield." "Not to me," Kieran said softly. "To her." He gestured toward the royal box, toward Ilara, and every eye in the arena turned to follow his gaze. "Yield to the woman you tried to break," Kieran continued. "Acknowledge her worth. Acknowledge her choice." Cassius looked up at Ilara, this woman he had thought to own and control, and she saw the exact moment he realized what he had lost. Not just a battle, but any chance of power over someone who had grown far beyond his reach. "I yield," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. "To Lady Ilara, to her choice, to her worth." Kieran stepped back, lowering his sword, but his eyes never left Cassius's face. "The trial is concluded," the herald announced. "The Alpha King's claim is upheld. Long live the king, long live our future queen." The cheer that rose from the crowd was deafening, a roar of approval that seemed to shake the very stones of the palace, but Ilara barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on Kieran as he looked up at her, bloodied and victorious and absolutely magnificent. He had fought for her, bled for her, risked his life and his crown to defend her right to choose. When he climbed the steps to the royal box and pulled her into his arms, the kiss that followed was fierce and claiming and full of promise. Around them, the crowd roared its approval, but Ilara was only aware of him, of the man who had moved heaven and earth to make her his queen. "It's done," he murmured against her lips. "Yes," she whispered back, "it's done." But as she looked out at the sea of faces, at the people who were now truly her people, Ilara knew it wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning. 1 year later, Ilara stood in the tower where her nightmare had begun and marvelled at how completely everything had changed. Gone were the crumbling stones and barred windows. In their place rose walls of white marble veined with gold, soaring arches that let in streams of sunlight, and wide windows that overlooked the flourishing gardens below. What had once been her prison was now the realm's most beautiful healing sanctuary, where people travelled from distant kingdoms to seek the touch of their beloved Queen Luna. "The irony is almost too perfect," Kieran said from behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders as he pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. "From the place of your greatest suffering to the source of your greatest joy." "Our greatest joy," she corrected, placing her hands over his and feeling the warm weight of her wedding ring against her finger. 6 months married, and she still felt that flutter of disbelief when she remembered that this magnificent man was truly hers. "Speaking of joy," he murmured, his hands sliding down to rest on the gentle curve of her belly. "How are our little ones feeling today?" Twins. The healers had confirmed it just 2 weeks ago, and Kieran had been insufferably proud ever since. Their people had celebrated for 3 straight days, declaring it a sign of the gods' favour that their beloved queen would bear not 1 heir, but 2. "Active!" she laughed, leaning back against his chest as one of the babies decided to practice their kicks. "I think they're going to be fighters like their father." "Or healers like their mother," he countered. "Imagine that, royal twins with your gifts." The thought filled her with wonder and a touch of protective fear. She had grown into her abilities over the past year, learned to control and channel them, but the idea of her children inheriting such power... "They'll be loved," Kieran said, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "Whatever gifts they have, whatever they become, they'll be loved and protected and never made to feel ashamed of who they are." "Promise me," she whispered. "I promise," he said solemnly. "Never what we endured, never that fear or shame or doubt." A soft knock at the sanctuary door interrupted them, and Marcus peered in with his familiar apologetic smile. "Forgive the intrusion, your majesties, but the evening petitioners are here, the family from the eastern provinces, the one with the child who hasn't spoken since the fever," Ilara finished, already moving toward her healing chair. "Send them up." This was how her days went now, filled with purpose and meaning in ways she had never imagined possible. Every morning brought new people seeking healing, new challenges for her growing abilities, new opportunities to serve the people who had embraced her so completely. The Easton family proved to be a young couple with hollow, desperate eyes and a little girl of perhaps 4 years who clung to her mother's skirts and watched the world with silent, haunted eyes. "The fever took her voice," the mother explained, tears streaming down her face. "The healers said there was damage to her throat, that she would never speak again. But we heard stories, miracles. We had to try." Ilara knelt before the child, keeping her movements slow and gentle. The little girl had been through enough trauma without adding fear to her burden. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly. "What's your name?" The child opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. The frustration in her dark eyes was heartbreaking. "It's all right," Ilara soothed. "May I?" She held out her hands, palms up, letting the child choose whether to trust her. After a long moment, tiny hands reached out to grasp Ilara's fingers. The connection was immediate and gentle, a golden warmth that flowed between them as Ilara searched for the source of the damage. There. Scar tissue from the fever, tiny but crucial, wrapped around the delicate structures that created speech. With infinite care, Ilara coaxed the damaged tissue to heal, encouraged new growth, restored what illness had stolen. "Mama?" The word was barely a whisper, but it rang through the sanctuary like a bell. "Oh, gods!" the mother sobbed, dropping to her knees to gather her daughter into her arms. "Oh, my sweet girl, my precious girl." "Mama," the child said again, her voice growing stronger. "Mama, I can talk." The father wept openly, pressing gold coins into Ilara's hands, despite her protests. But she had learned to accept their gratitude gracefully, understanding that the giving was as important to them as the healing was to her. "How can we ever repay you?" the mother asked through her tears. "Love her," Ilara said simply. "Love her and let her know every day how precious she is. That's payment enough." After they left, Kieran found her standing at the great window, watching the sun set over their kingdom. "Tired?" he asked, settling beside her on the cushioned bench. "Happy," she said instead. "So incredibly happy I sometimes can't believe it's real." "Believe it," he said, pulling her close. "Believe in us. Believe in the life we've built." "I do," she whispered. "I finally do." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the kingdom, watching the lights begin to twinkle in the village below. Their people, their responsibility, their joy. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Kieran asked eventually. "When I broke down your door?" "Every day," she admitted. "Do you ever regret it, the complications it caused, the challenges it brought?" "Never." His voice was immediate and certain. "Not for a single moment. You want to know what I regret?" "What?" "That it took me so long to find you, that you spent even one day believing you were worthless, that you suffered even one moment of doubt about your place in this world." "I was exactly where I needed to be," she said, settling her hand over the place where their children grew. "We both were. All of it, every moment of pain and fear and doubt led us here." "To this tower," he said with a soft laugh, "to this sanctuary, to this life, to each other." "And to them," he added, his hand joining hers on her belly. "Our little fighters, our future." "Do you think they'll have my healing gift?" she asked. "I hope they'll have your heart," he said simply, "your courage, your compassion, your ability to see worth where others see only weakness." "And your strength," she countered, "your protection, your ability to move heaven and earth for the people you love." "Our love," he corrected. "That's what I want them to have most of all. The certainty that they are loved completely and without condition." A year ago the word love had terrified her. Now it was as natural as breathing, as essential as heartbeat. She loved this man, loved the life they had built, loved the people they served and the children they would raise. "From your lowest moment to our greatest triumph," Kieran said softly, echoing words he had spoken to her many times over the past months. "You are everything, Ilara, everything I never dared hope for." "You saved me," she whispered, the old response that always made him shake his head. "We saved each other," he corrected, as he always did. "We saved each other, and we're going to save these little ones from every doubt we ever carried." As if in response to their father's voice, the babies stirred, and Ilara laughed at the synchronized movement. "I think they approve," she said. "They'd better," Kieran growled with mock sternness. "I have plans for them, training schedules, educational requirements, character development programs." "They're not even born yet," Ilara protested, laughing. "It's never too early to start planning," he said solemnly, then broke into a grin. "Besides, they're going to need to be prepared. The realm will expect great things from the children of the Alpha King and his miracle queen." "Our miracle children," she said softly. "Born of a love that survived everything the world threw at it." "Born of a bond that could not be broken," he agreed. "Born to rule with both strength and compassion. Born to be everything we never had the courage to believe we could be." They held each other as the last light faded from the sky, surrounded by the sanctuary that had risen from the ashes of her imprisonment, warmed by the love that had transformed them both from broken individuals into something whole and beautiful and unshakable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to heal, new opportunities to serve their kingdom. But tonight was theirs alone, a moment of perfect peace in the tower where her nightmare had ended and her dream had begun. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "And I love you," he replied, his voice warm with promise and certainty, "until my last breath and beyond." Outside, their kingdom slept peacefully, protected by an Alpha King who would move mountains for his people, and a Queen Luna whose healing touch had already begun to transform their world. And in the sanctuary tower where love had conquered fear, where healing had overcome hurt, where two broken souls had found each other and become whole, the future stirred with infinite possibility. Some stories, Ilara thought as she drifted towards sleep in her mate's arms, truly do have the most beautiful endings. And sometimes, she realized with a smile, those endings are really just the beginning of something even more wonderful.